The fact is, Chairman Gon or his defense team on October 17th of 2019, the defense team submitted a preparatory brief to the court.
In November, 2 years ago, when Mr. Gon was arrested, and up until December of 2019, last year, that would have been more than a year of time, no date had been set for the first hearing of the trial. Nothing decided. And on October 17th, 2019, went ahead and issued its intended claims for the defense. And defense counsel is explaining that this case was essentially where, in order to halt the merger with Renault, Japanese management in Nissan and the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry fabricated a case of misconduct by Carlos Ghosn because they needed to halt this merger. And Mr. Ghosn was deemed an obstacle to halting the merger. In order to halt the merger between the companies, Mr. Ghosn had to somehow be targeted and to somehow have his downfall. A case had to be fabricated, and the Special Investigative Division of the Tokyo District Public Prosecutor's Office, their interest aligned with this. So along with the Ministry of Economy and the Japanese management in Nissan and the Special Investigative Division, their interests aligned in a three-way conspiracy where they did a way of bringing charges forth in a matter of fabrication under meticulous guidance by the prosecution. And the defense was prepared to prove this if you went to trial, essentially. So in terms of these intended claims, the Ghosn Defense Counsel is saying that there are no facts to establish that. You should dismiss this suit. It's not there is no merit for a trial. So essentially, the defense demanded a dismissal. Now, I should quickly say that the courts in Japan would never dismiss. Moreover, there's a certain area of unnaturalness, shall we say, where you know this was an internal issue with the Nissan company. And this is going to be proven that you fabricated this. Greg Kelly, who was also charged, remains in Japan and is still waiting for his trial. And in his case, there is no aggravated breach of trust for Mr. Kelly. It's just the false reporting. It's very clear that he will be acquitted. And without the aggravated breach of trust, his case is very limited. And yet, over a year have elapsed. In April now, he has no trial date determined. And why is that? It's been 1.5 years. Because the prosecution doesn't want an acquittal. They're trying to stretch it out as much as they can. Regarding violations to the financial instrument and exchange law, broadly, as Mr. Hosono pointed out, there's no obligation to enter the executive compensation after retirement in the securities report. That's the fact. In the Lebanon press conference that Mr. Ghosn had, Professor Wataru Tanaka of the University of Tokyo, who is an authority on the corporate rehabilitation law, has also clearly stated this position. and going so far as to say that the arrest of Mr. Gon is essentially the shame of Japan.
Whether it's the prosecutors or the Minister of Justice or the government of Japan seeking extradition, it's not clear to us. But from the standpoint, position of the prosecutors, I wonder if they really would like Mr. Gon to be extradited. I doubt it, to be honest. Because if I was responsible in charge of prosecuting Mr. Gon, I think I would feel quite desperate as to how to prove our claims in the trial. In my process of writing the book, I really felt that this is a tough situation for prosecutors. They cannot prove it, and that's why they have to postpone the trial. This is a common practice and part of trial prosecutors.
So I'm really sorry to say this, but I don't think the Special Investigative Division of the Prosecutor's Office has any real feel in their common sense of business decision-making for a global company's CEO. So as you say, Attorney Gohara, this case will likely face a persistent battle plan of trial prolongment. And as far as the financial standards applicable to the securities report go, the Nippon Credit Bank case, there was a Supreme Court ruling on this, which has clearly stipulated that the appropriate financial standards at the time of reporting apply. So the prosecution may assert that unpaid compensation should be reported in their own view, but I don't think it can be sustained in the courts. A trial date that was never determined after his arrest, and that his right to a prompt trial guaranteed under the Japanese Constitution didn't materialize. At the time in December 2019, over a year after his arrest, Mr. Gon had no trial date. And with respect to Mr. Greg Kelly, who has just one count of false reporting of executive compensation, his first trial date is undetermined. Isn't this absurd, Mr. Hosono? Yes. Well, I just happened to hear this from Attorney Junichi Hironaka the other day regarding the reason why Mr. Kelly's trial date is not finalized, is that there's disagreement over evidence disclosure in the pretrial conference procedures. Apparently, the disclosed evidence is incredibly large, and it supposedly is going to take half a year or more to photocopy all of that. Apparently, the prosecutor's office photocopying is outsourced to some contracted private personal business in bulk. And that business is small. They don't have the capacity to process large volumes. Now, in such a situation, you could call upon a major office outsourcing company and get the copies done in 1 or 2 weeks, but apparently the prosecutors say that can't be allowed. Attorney Hironaka feels, however, that this is just an excuse of the prosecutors, and what they're trying to do is to buy time by using this photocopying as an excuse, and using that time to somehow find the evidence to convict Mr. Kelly. They're looking for evidence at this late hour? That's right. Meaning Mr. Kelly has no reason for his arrest. I mean, Mr. Kelly was originally supposed to have surgery for a condition that he had. He was told that he would be able to go home right away. He was deceived and brought over to Japan and then arrested. And he's still constrained by his bail conditions. His trial date is undetermined, and he cannot return to the United States. That is unforgivable. Gohara Sensei, is there anything that can be done?
Really, for Mr. Kelly, this is a very shameful situation. It's likely that the prosecutors are aware that Mr. Kelly needs to get surgery, but despite that knowledge, lured Mr. Kelly to Japan. And if they can arrest him here, they expected Mr. Kelly to confess as well. That was the prosecutor's intent, as I see it. Mr. Kelly would want to go back to the States very quickly and therefore would confess. I believe that was the prosecutor's reading of the situation, as I wrote in my book. The criminal justice system in Japan is such that the prosecutors have absolute power, and that power is exercised in an undue fashion, leading to massive violation of human rights of the suspects and the defendants. And if the defendant is a foreigner, the situation becomes even worse. In that context, I highlight that point as a significant issue found in the criminal justice system here. We have a defendant who claims asserting his or her innocence, but with the likelihood that defendant fleeing Japan, the defendant will continue to be detained in this country. Likewise, Mr. Kelly was unduly arrested by the prosecutors and indicted unduly as well, suffering a significant violation of his human rights. He is another example of a foreigner subjected to that treatment. Many Japanese, the public must know that and must feel ashamed in the face of the international society. Embarrassing, at the same time, a fearful country. Something that one must fear about this country. If the fact that the trial, Mr. Kelly, has been postponed interminably, this could be a diplomatic issue between the U.S. and Japan.
Without even asking me an honest explanation about what's taking place. I understand that the Prime Minister of Japan, Abe-san, said clearly in an answer to a question that he wished this would have been sold into a boardroom in Nissan, which is frankly where this misunderstanding would have been solved. This can happen to anybody, and you have zero way of defending yourself, and you can spend a very long time of your life imprisoned, if not in a prison, at least held as a hostage in Japan, like Greg Kelly. I remind you that Greg Kelly, who was arrested with me on November the 19th, is still in Japan. He cannot leave Japan, and he still doesn't have a date of the beginning of the trial. And Greg Kelly is accused of being accomplice of a tentative to make a false statement on a compensation that was neither decided nor paid. And he is in Japan, has been in Japan for more than 18 months, waiting a trial. The guy is going to be spending 3, 4, 5 years in Japan. I mean, it's ridiculous. This can happen to anybody. when you look at the arrest of Greg Kelly, it's pretty interesting the way it happened. Greg Kelly was lured to Japan even though he was sick, as you know. Nissan sent a special airplane to bring him to the board meeting at the request of Harinada, who was at the heart of the plot. As chairman of the board, always said, you can participate to board meeting from video conference. I didn't want people to be physically present. But Harinada proposed to Greg Kelly to send an airplane and promised him he will be back in 24 or 48 hours. When Greg Kelly landed in Tokyo, he was arrested by the prosecutor. So what a coincidence.